A lot of people ignore this particular resource, and they ignore it at their peril, not realizing that they're leaving hundreds, if not millions of dollars on the table. And unfortunately, ignorance is not necessarily bliss when it comes to finance and knowledge and building something significant for yourself in this world. This fifth webinar of the Navigating Finance webinar series, brought to you by the Student Guild and the SRC at Griffith University, is going to be talking about debt and advantages and disadvantages of taking debt on board. What is debt? How can you use it? Is it all bad? What kind of concepts can you take away from this particular webinar to ensure that you actually understand debt a little bit more, right? So my key thing for you to understand post this webinar is to be able to utilize debt to your advantage, right? It is not necessarily a bad thing, although the media and other people, and most people, will tout it to be as a bad thing. So let's break it down and actually unpack it so that you understand exactly where I'm coming from. So quick typical disclaimer right here, this is all general information only. Please do not take this as personal advice. If you do need personal advice, go and seek a financial advisor. Cool, so the webinar overview, it'll be covering off on a little bit about myself, what to expect as per usual, borrowing capacity, how that works, how to get debt, why get debt in the first place, how to buy your first property reasonably quickly, and the place of property in your wealth creation, right? So a little bit about myself. So came from science to finance to fatherhood, and I essentially started off from a position where I had no positive financial role models in my life. And when I look back at when I was 10 to 13, I had this vision and I had this goal of becoming an NBA superstar. At the time, Michael Jordan, I'm not sure if some of you have seen The Last Dance. Hands up for some of you who have seen The Last Dance episode on Netflix recently. It's all the rage at the moment. Yep, good. Okay, there's a few of you. So The Last Dance, Michael Jordan was a big influence, a positive role model in my life. And I thought, why not become a professional basketball player, because they make a ton of money. And I, at the start of my life, around that 10 years up to 18 years, all I thought was, well, earning an income is the only way to become rich or wealthy, right? And I've learned along the way that that's not necessarily the case. So I was aiming to become an NBA superstar. As soon as I hit 20, realized that I wasn't quite good enough, so I had to kind of backtrack and reassess my goals. The next one was becoming a doctor. I wanted to become a doctor because I knew that doctors were able to make a ton of money, and that will provide me the freedom that I want, right? So this whole time I was on the way to aiming to get into med school. Started to work as a scientist, and essentially worked out that, hey, I can invest the money that I was saving at the time. So I started investing, and I got my first mortgage, right? I bought my first house at age 23 as I was finishing my honors degree at Griffith University down the Gold Coast. And then I started getting obsessed with finance and how it all works. So the first thing that came to mind was, okay, if I can put $2,000 in my, or $1,000 in my mortgage every single week, that's going to save me $2. So the more I pay down the mortgage, the faster it's going to be and the more money I'm going to save. So that was the initial kind of momentum that I was building for myself, until I started reading books, going to wealth seminars, watching a bunch of DVDs, and essentially immersing myself to the wonderful world of finance, and finding out there are other options available. The initial option was the most basic option, and look, it's good for some, it's good for most, I should say. But if you can dabble in and you can understand the concepts and go back to first principles, which is what we're going to be doing today about debt, it's amazing how you can speed up the process of achieving your financial goals. So that's pretty much me. So I went from trying to become an NBA all-star to failing, hitting 20 and reassessing, tried to get to med school thinking becoming a medico was going to be the be-all and end-all of income creation, until I realized that maybe income is not really the main thing that I'm after, because I was after financial freedom, like freedom to do what I want, whenever I want, whenever I want, wherever I want, with whomever I wanted. right? So that was the big thing for me. I'm a big advocate of learning as much as I can. Therefore, I threw myself at books and learned a fair few things and learned that I could actually replace some or most, if not all or more of my income from having a capital base, right? So we'll be talking about that today. All right, so what to expect once again, good debt versus bad debt. We'll be going over that. And borrowing capacity as a resource, right? A lot of people see it as a negative thing. Borrowing capacity is actually something that's very, very powerful. How to get debt? What do banks look for? What would parents look for, or friends or family members, whoever it may be that you're looking to get debt from, right? So why would you get debt in the first place? How does it help, right? How to go about buying your first property without kind of stressing yourself out. Who's stressed out about buying your first property? Hands up. Sure, totally understandable. Today, I'm going to be showing you a different way to consider how to buy that first property, because there are faster ways to do things, right? Wealth creation and the property and how it fits within your wealth creation and the all-weather strategy, okay? So like I said, if any of this is not making any sense to you, make sure you ask these questions, right? There's a chat box and there's a Q&A box available, so feel free to do that. So your first steps, the key thing here is to have an open mind. A lot of media companies and a lot of people who have the best, I guess, intentions in your life will tell you to do one thing, because in their mind, it is the best way. So what I suggest you do is keep your mind open, go back to first principles, return on investment, risk-free return, and cost of capital, and understand that it is an asset or is a capital allocation game that we're playing here. Money is a resource in your life, and it's about making the right choices to make your money work harder for you. So the first step is to have this resourcefulness mindset, right? Very important to tap into this, because if you don't, guess what? Your stress levels are going to increase and you're going to be tied to a job, right? It's okay if you're tied to a job because you choose to be tied to a job and you love what you do. It is not okay to be forced to do that for the rest of your life, right? Very important point to take, right? Another thing is to understand what you should be focusing on, because what you focus on grows, right? So what you want to do is tackle this part here. So things that you can control and things that matter, bring it together and play in that space, in that Venn diagram there, right? Next bit here is understanding the law of diminishing returns, i.e. the 80-20 rule or the Pareto principle. Who's heard of this before? If you've been here before, I would have drilled this in your brains by now. Who's heard of this Pareto principle? Awesome, good stuff. So what you want to do is tap into the minimum level of input to maximum level of output. So today we're going to be talking about debt. How do you structure the debt accordingly to ensure that you can actually win financially, right? This is the big one. In my opinion, this is the catalyst to set you financially free faster. Yeah? Cool. So what did Warren say? An idiot with a plan can beat a genius without a plan. All right, so let's get planning. Cool. So the finance endgame is this, right? We want the ideal income. Everyone has got a different ideal income in mind. So what I usually say is set a goal, a stretch goal, and a big, hairy, audacious goal that is designed to scare you a little bit, right? Set yourself 3 goals, and what you want to do is create a trajectory for the capital that you're saving, right, to make work for you to achieve that ideal income within a time frame that works best for your particular circumstance, right? So how many number of years will it take you to get there, right? So there are a few variables to consider. There is the dollars saved, right? Tax lowered, your return on investment, right? Those are the big 3 key things that you need to consider here, right? To produce the time and the result that you want, which is achieving your ideal income, right? So the more you save and the more you invest, right, the better you're going to be. The more taxes you save, right, or taxes that you defer potentially, right, the more capital you're going to have in the bottom line, right, to invest again. And then the more return on investment you have, the higher the likelihood of getting off this particular line right here. Most people are relying upon their superannuation to fund their retirement. Most people don't even consider super as an asset, right? So what I need to tell you is super is an asset that you need to consider, right? And then post that outside of super, I suggest you start creating a budget to ensure, or a cash flow management system covered in webinar number 2, right? To ensure that you get on this particular line right here. And then some of the strategies that we'll be talking about today, and strategies that we covered off on the previous webinars, will allow you to lift off from this particular line right here, saving you a bunch of times, hopefully decades, right? Because most people actually never get to the ideal income. So the great thing about what you guys are doing is you're investing in yourselves, right? You're actually understanding that it is important to start with an ideal income in mind, right? Stephen R. Covey, the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right, starts off with habit number 1, start with the end in mind. If you can do that, understand where point A is, so where you are today, and where you want to be, and what will happen is the next viable step will appear the more you do research, right? Very, very, very important thing to consider, right? What you want is to have a ton of options in front of you and not be forced to do something you don't necessarily want to do. Now let's get started on the debt stuff. Okay, so Archimedes principle. I don't know if any of you have heard of this. Hands up if you've heard of this particular quote. Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world. Not very many of us have heard this one. Okay, let me break this down for you. Debt is the lever. Let me change that. Your asset, the underlying asset, is the fulcrum, and your return on investment is the world in this particular diagram. So how it works is this. If the asset, the underlying asset, is a solid one, you can load up on the debt quite considerably, and with loading up on the debt means your return on investment will be amplified, right? Now, the key thing to this is that it can go both ways. This is why a lot of people say debt is bad, because the majority of those people that say debt is bad typically have gotten burnt by debt. So we'll be going through how to not get burnt by debt today, okay? So your borrowing capacity. What if I told you that you guys have $1 million in the bank account? Would you be happy with that today? Hands up if you'd be happy with that. $1 million. Awesome. Okay, there's a few of you. Of course you'd be happy, right? This is where what everyone is not really understanding. It is worth, in my opinion, at least $1 million to each and every one of us in this webinar right now, right? Your borrowing capacity is a resource that cannot be ignored, right? So use it in a productive way to ensure that you can hit your goals as fast as you can, or in a manner that is akin, or that you're comfortable with, basically, right? So it's about understanding how do you go about using your borrowing capacity to speed up the process of achieving financial freedom, right? And ultimately, what you want to do is do not get bad debt, right? You always want to be loading up on the good debt. So what is good debt versus bad debt? The easy thing to consider here is good debt is the underlying asset as per the fulcrum, right? The underlying asset is a positive one, right? That's what good debt is. Oops. Good debt, the underlying asset, will grow in value over time, right? The underlying asset of bad debt is decreasing in value over time. Any questions on this? Is it all making sense? Hands up if it's making sense to you, right? So where did the 1 million thing come in, right? I will go through exactly how this works in a few slides, right? Because a lot of people ignore this particular resource, and they ignore it at their peril, not realizing that they're leaving hundreds, if not millions of dollars on the table. And unfortunately, ignorance is not necessarily bliss when it comes to finance and knowledge and building something significant for yourself in this world, right? You need to acquire more knowledge. You need to surround yourself with people who understand the rules of the game to ensure that you can utilize the resources available to you to speed up goal achievement. That's what it ultimately is all about, right? Any questions before I move forward? Oh my God, I'm in bad debt. Yes, look, in the end, some of us are in bad debt, but the key thing to this is get rid of your bad debt, right? So that could be one of your first goals as your first step. Get rid of bad debt. Optimize and save for potentially buying a property, which we'll go over a little bit later, to get to good debt, right? Because you can structure yourself in a position, put yourself in a position to win financially just by doing a few little things. Get out of bad debt, build a buffer for yourself, start saving for investments, right? Start building a property portfolio, start building a diversified fund of assets, and then start growing your assets. Work on yourself. Make sure that your human capital and your ability and your skills are worth something in the marketplace, right? And then suddenly you cannot go wrong, right? We want to get to financial resilience. And that's what these particular webinars are all about. So sharing with you a few ideas and concepts that you may not have come across with in your theory, in the land of theory, and in the land of the media and everyone else kind of sharing their positive intentions and good experience with you. Some of these experiences may not be the best for you, right? So you just need to consider, how do you break it down? It's got to make sense. Before you move forward, it's got to make sense. I call that the sleep test. If you're losing sleep at night over these things, do not do it. You need to get a solid understanding to ensure that you're moving forward with confidence. So what is good debt? The underlying asset is important, right? If the underlying asset is a negative one, and one that decreases in value or drops to zero over time, i.e. you go on a holiday, right? You go on a holiday, you get a credit card, you pay $10,000 for a holiday on that credit card. The holiday is now worth $0, but you're paying a 10% credit card cost of capital on that debt, and your holiday is worth $0. What kind of return on investment are you getting financially? Zero, right? You're getting a negative 10% return because of your debt, right? So what you want to do is ensure that you're loading up on good debt that has an underlying asset that has the potential to grow and a downside risk of little to none. Very, very important. Yeah? Cool. Okay. Debt cost is less than the return on investment of the project. So you got to ask yourself, what are the projects that you have in mind? Is it buying a property? Is it buying that car? Is it whatever it may be? Like, you got to consider why you're using your $1 million in your bank account towards something that is not really helping you financially. That's why I like to divide good debt versus bad debt, because a lot of people bundle debt all together and say all debt is bad. Not necessarily the case. Yeah. What is bad debt? Credit card debt, personal loans, car loans, debt to fund crap. That's a technical financial term. Who's heard of debt to fund crap? That's a technical one. Hands up if you've heard of that one. And hopefully none of you have used that, right? Very important, right? So the key thing to this is the debt cost is less than return on investment. Wait a second. That should be more than. Made a mistake there. More than, right? Debt cost is more than the return on investment. If that is the case, you are going backwards. Just like what I said, if your credit card is worth 10%, let's hypothetically say, some credit cards can go as high as 22%, right? If you're owing money on that credit card and you're paying 22% on the dollar, and you're putting that money into a project that is returning 0% and it's now worth $0 after you've done it, guess what? You're stuck, aren't you? You're getting a negative 22%. Back to Archimedes Lever, right? The underlying asset is a negative one. Therefore, instead of pushing the return on investment up, it's actually pushing you down. And what happens is this, right? What happens is it's actually one of these particular arrows right here, right? So what's happening is, instead of the trajectory hitting a number of years that's actually quite palatable, now you're forced to wait 10, 15, 20 more years. And if you're not a good saver, if you're a good saver and if you've got a ton of debt, guess what? You're waiting a lifetime, right? This is why a lot of people say debt is bad, but it's not necessarily a bad thing if you know how to use it. It is a $1 million borrowing resource that's sitting in all of our bank accounts, right? The thing is, you've got to use it properly to actually make it happen, to actually pocket that $1 million. Very, very important point. Any questions? Oh, we've got a question here. What if you can't pay back your credit card and it's thousands of dollars? Look, you need to pay it back. You have to make it a priority, right? Back to cost of capital, risk-free return, return on investment. If you can get a return on investment that's higher than your cost of capital, right? Maybe it's not worthwhile paying back to begin with, because if you've got $100 and if you've got multiple options, right, with different return on investments, right, you got to ask yourself, is one of them worthwhile to put towards the debt? Because if your credit card is charging you 22% per annum, I would suggest you to aim to actually pay that off as soon as possible, because you'd be hard pressed to find a consistent, right, a consistent return on investment at 22% per annum for the rest of your life. Hard pressed. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's very doable, but you got to be strategic about it. So you got to ask yourself, is it worthwhile holding the cost? And is it holding you back from utilizing your borrowing capacity to the best of your ability? That's the kicker right here, because if you've got credit card debt, guess what? You won't be able to borrow up to your maximum capacity or one deal from your maximum capacity, because instead of your lines being up there, your line is currently down there. This is what credit card and personal debt does to your borrowing capacity. It lowers it, right? So you need to make sure that you pay that debt off as fast as possible if it's bad debt. Now, if you've got a project that's going to get you a return on investment higher than that cost of capital, then it's worthwhile considering the pros and cons associated with it. Risk mitigation is key when you're looking at projects and investing in that particular project. Does that cover off on that particular question? Hands up if that's okay with you. Yeah, is that making sense? Awesome. Good. Fantastic. All right. So super access. This is a common question. Back to return on investment, risk-free return, cost of capital. Because what you're doing is you're borrowing from your future self, right? You're actually getting a debt from your 60-year-old self by taking money out of super. So you got to ask yourself, if you take out 10,000 or 20,000, can you get a higher return on investment on these two amounts, or lower, whatever you come up with, basically? Can you get a higher return on investment than what you otherwise would have gotten in that super? So in this particular case, the cost of capital is what the return on investment in your super may be over the time up to age 60, right? Does everyone understand this? So if you're looking at taking some money out of your super, and if you're not absolutely desperate, which is what it's designed to do by the government, by the way, right? If you can outperform what you think your super is going to do, maybe it's worthwhile doing. Now, I'm not here to provide advice on this stuff. You just need to be able to understand what are the levers you need to pull. A lot of the media is telling you it's a bad idea, right? For some, or for most, it's a bad idea. But for some who are in the know, who understands how all the levers work, it may be worthwhile pursuing, right? It depends on the projects that you're putting that money into. Okay, cool. Hard at the moment when incomes have been reduced to zero. Yeah, look, in the end, if your income is being reduced to zero, it's going to be very, very difficult. So what you need to do is look at the webinar number 2 and see and find out what kind of income generating activities you can do for yourself to ensure that you can keep that buffer for as long as possible and actually build up your savings again and build up an income, right? Because income is one of the pillars, or it's a foundational thing for building wealth. You need to be able to have an income, live within your means, save a surplus, invest some in yourself and in your investment portfolio to ensure that you actually kick some butt. All right, so we've got another question here. What if you are not eligible to take money from your superannuation? Well, if you're not eligible, guess what? It's not an option for you, so you don't have to actually consider it. You're forced to go down the path of the traditional way of building your wealth, which is saving more than what you currently spending less than what you're currently earning, right? First and foremost, And then out of that savings, that surplus, you put it towards investments and reinvesting in your mind as well, and making sure that your skills are high enough so that the world will deem it fit to pay you, give you a remuneration that is commensurate to your skills, right? As per what we've covered in the past few webinars, how much you earn is directly correlated to how much value you add to the people that you serve. Let me say that again. How much you earn is directly correlated to how much value you add to your community. It's really as simple as that. So you need to ensure that you're constantly getting better, right? So an investment in personal development is a key thing. You need to make sure that you're doing that. That's why you guys are going to university right now and ensuring that you have a brighter future than someone who may not have gone through university and do not have the opportunities laid out in front of them as per what you guys have, right? I'm not saying just because you go to university it's guaranteed. You still got to work your butt off, right? It's just one box tick to ensure that it increases the likelihood of you achieving your financial goals, right? So in terms of super access, you got to ask yourself, is it worth your while? You got to ask it, right? Any other questions on this before I move on? No, all making sense. Good. Okay, so how to get debt, right? So there are two key things that you need to consider when getting debt, right? You need to have an income and you got to have a deposit, right? Banks call this serviceability income and collateral deposit, right? So what you need to do is to show someone that you've got an income and you can actually pay it back, right? Because most debtees want their money back and they want a time frame associated with that, right? Banks want a history of reliable income, a time frame to get their money back, and a healthy financial history before they can trust you to lend a large sum of money, right? Because if you don't have an income, it's going to be very, very difficult for a bank to provide you with a solid debt instrument, right? Or rates that are low. Like banks will throw credit cards at you left, right, and center at 15 up to 22% cost on a year-to-year basis, even though you're not earning a reliable income. It's really sad. It shouldn't be the case. In my opinion, the banks should not be able to do this, but they keep doing it. So you need to arm yourself with information to ensure that you don't fall into this trap. I know people who've been stuck in their credit card debt for over 20 years. It's really sad. It's slowed down everything. If you go back to this one here, it is one big massive red line pushing them down, right? They're not even anywhere near close to achieving their financial goals, purely because the debt trap has actually kind of gotten a hold of them and they can't seem to get out of it, right? So what we need to do is make sure that we don't fall into this particular trap right here, because it can literally kneecap all of your financial upside, right? So what do they want? They want a history of reliable income, right? What do parents want? They want someone they can trust. They don't necessarily need as much information as the banks do, right? So for example, for people, show of hands, how many people have lost their jobs and aren't currently earning an income? Okay, cool. Okay, so if you're not currently earning an income, what you need to ensure you have is enough money to see you through on a week-to-week basis. How many weeks will determine, or how big of a buffer you have will determine how many weeks you have available to you, right? What you need to do for yourself is build a buffer by A, gaining an income, some kind of income somewhere, somehow, which is covered in webinar number 2, right? Or B, borrowing from, not necessarily a bank. If you can get away with borrowing from a bank, fantastic. But in the end of the day, they're most likely going to charge you. Now, if you can borrow from family and friends, it's better. But how do you do that? You need to ensure that you have a plan of attack, right? If you've got a plan and if you lay it out and you say, this is how much I need to borrow, this will see me through for 1 or 2 weeks, right? This is the plan that I'm doing. These are the steps that I'm trying to do over that 1 or 2 week period to ensure that I'm going to get you your money back and put myself in a position where I don't need to borrow anymore. Now, if worst case scenario were to happen and I need to borrow some more, I will show you what I need to do again, right? people who lend money want to see proactiveness, right? Because they're not going to lend money to anyone who is not proactive in their approach, right? So what you need to do is get your cost of capital as low as possible, right? So for example, for the people who've got credit card debts, if you can somehow get another credit card that's at 0%, do a balance transfer and cancel the other one, right? 0% for 12 months, let's say, then you've got 12 months of time frame at 0% to pay it off, or pay a large chunk off. And guess what? You can do that over and over and over again, so long as your credit card debt is getting lower and lower and lower each year, right? Very important to not get sucked into the credit card, right? I mean, there are particular uses for the credit card, but for this particular, I guess, demographic and this audience, we don't necessarily need to get a credit card. I mean, there's rewards points, and you can definitely use a 55-day interest-free period, but it's not necessary. Like we're talking a few $100s here. It's not that big a deal in the grand scheme of things. The risk associated with having a credit card is that you spend the whole lot and you can't pay it off, and you're stuck. So a good rule of thumb is if you can't pay it off on a month-to-month basis, you shouldn't have it, right? Is that making sense, guys? Hands up if that's making sense about credit cards. Awesome. Good. Any questions on this before I move forward? How to get debt, about how to get debt? Oh, all good. Excellent. So why get debt? Why get good debt, I should say. We know why not to get bad debt. We understand that, right? So speed, time is valuable. With debt, i.e. the Archimedes principle, with that lever, which is the debt, right? If you can get a good fulcrum, i.e. the asset, the underlying asset is a solid one that allows you to amplify your return on investment with a debt lever, right? You can create a return on investment that is mammoth relative to what you normally get, right? It amplifies the return on investment tremendously, and we'll be going through an exercise a little bit later about that, right? If you can back yourself, and if you understand that you can actually pay the debt off or control the debt, control the downside of the debt, it provides massive certainty. Now, it's a bit of a quandary how to kind of think this through, but just trust me on this one. Like, a lot of people aren't really keen on getting debt because they'd rather get this other thing called equity, right? Equity is sharing the risk. By taking on debt, you're taking on all of the risk, right? So now this is going for the upside now. Obviously, the debt can go up. It can force your return on investment up, and can also force your return on investment down, right? So you need to make sure that the underlying asset, right, i.e. the fulcrum, right, used, is one that will be a positive result, like provide a positive return on investment. And ultimately, it speeds up the process of achieving your survive, strive, and thrive numbers, your income and capital goals, right, on the back end of your investment career. Now, some people are on a 5-year journey, others are on a 50-year and a never journey, right? So you got to ask yourself, what kind of time frame do you want to achieve your particular goals, right? Because you need an income at the back end of your investment career. To provide that income, you need capital to get a return on investment, right? It's really as simple as that. Okay, how can I get access to webinar number 2? So to get access to webinar number 2, just go to Andrew David Courtney on YouTube, and you'll get access to all the webinars, right? And you'll also be getting an email from one of the guys at Student Guild today asking for some feedback, right, on what kind of future topics you'd like covered, along with all of the videos associated with that I've presented over the past 5 weeks. All right, so this is how you get access. Awesome, happy to help. Okay, so why get good debt? So back to the doubling net assets, right? So what is the doubling net assets? It's basically that particular drawing that I was showing you before. If this is the dollars and this is time, what we want to do is get a compounding return, right? Most people are on a line like this, saving, the good savers. Most people are on that line, unfortunately, right? If you're trying to achieve this particular thing, what you're trying to do is get an amplification, right? Speed up that process, right? Saving yourself a number of years. Now, where does the rule of 72 fit in this thing? It fits in this way. Let me move this thing out of the way. If you have, let's say, $10,000, this $10,000 can double over a 36-year period if you invest and get a 2% return on investment. Now, that $10,000 can double every 14 years if you get a 5% return on investment. You can double at 7.2 years at 10% and double every 5 years. So what you want to do is create multiple doubling rates throughout your investment career, right? Most people have a 40 to 50-year investment career, right? Maybe 70, you know, for some people, for some of us who are lucky enough to live in a ripe old age kind of thing, right? So what you want to do is you want to double your net asset position multiple times, right? And what determines doubling rate is your return on investment, right? So this is the rule of 72. So why am I talking about this? Well, good debt allows you, like I said earlier, to amplify your return on investment. Let me show you how this works. So let's hypothetically say you're buying a $500,000 property, right? If you manage to save $500,000, good on you. That's a fantastic savings rate. Don't know how long that may take you, right? Some people will take a lifetime. Some people will never actually get to saving $500,000. But if you manage to do that, you're buying it at 100% down, right? So you're putting $500,000 to buy this $500,000 property. And over that 15-year period, what typically happens within the property space is it doubles over that period. 7 to 20 years is the typical timeline, depending on how good or bad your property is. Sometimes it never doubles, unfortunately, right? So you need to make sure that you pick the right one. Now, assuming you pick a middle of the road where it doubles at 15 years, right? You're getting a return on investment of 4.72% per annum, which means you'll be doubling every 15 years, right? Makes sense. Now, what if you buy that property with a 20% deposit, right? The 20% deposit is $100,000, right? What happens now is with that $100,000, you've controlled the property. You're controlling all of the upside associated with that property. And yes, I'm ignoring the income side of things, but we're looking at purely on the capital growth, right? With the capital growth on this, you're getting a return on investment of, on average, 12.68%, doubling your initial $100,000, right, at a rate of approximately 6 years. 6 years to double. What if you put in a 10% deposit, right? Put in $50,000, you're getting a return on investment at 17.33% on average over that 15-year period. Guess what? You're now doubling for faster than every 5 years, right? If you put in a 5% deposit for the people who are first homeowners in this group, right? You're getting a return on investment of 22.5% return on investment over a 15-year period, right? This is over a 15-year period, and what typically happens is how it looks is this. If this is the return on investment, and this is the time frame, right? How it looks is something like this, right? So it's very, very high return on investment, and it gets normalized. So the average is 22.5%, when in fact, in the first few years, these are returning at 55%, 40%, 30%, right? Depending on how you structure the debt. This is an important factor to consider, right? Because if you can control all of the upside of that fulcrum, that underlying asset, right? The upside or the ROI becomes massive because you're utilizing your borrowing capacity, that $1 million that I was talking about, to good use. A lot of people use that $1 million to bad use and put themselves in a hole. What you want to do is get rid of all bad debt and make sure that every single debt that you have on your portfolio, in your portfolio, is good debt. Is this making sense? Hands up if this is making sense, guys. Awesome. Good stuff. Is this considering the interest you would be charged during that time? No, this is not considering the interest that you'd be charged during that time, right? So it depends on what you're doing with that property. Is it an investment property or is it a principal place of residence, right? So if it's an investment property, you typically get rent in there. And with rent, it actually offsets the interest payments and the holding costs associated with that property, right? And what typically happens is there's a deficit. So this, as I was saying earlier, ignores the income side of the equation. Now, if it's a principal place of residence, what happens is it's basically replacing the rent because you'd have to pay rent anyway, right? Unfortunately, we all are, most of us aren't trust fund babies, right? So we all have to pay rent. Therefore, you're replacing the rent. You're going to have to pay rent anyway. Therefore, it's part and parcel of life, right? But you still can't ignore the income side of things. But for this particular example, we have, right? But in the end of the day, it's a constant. The income is a constant, is what I'm trying to say here, right? Cool. Any other questions before I move on? So the key to this thing is debt structuring. Is very, very important when it comes to amplifying the return on investments on the assets that you currently have, right? Because you can literally double your net asset position every 3 years if you were to invest this way, because you're using your $1 million resource, your borrowing capacity, to its maximum potential. Most people don't see it that way. What I'd love for you to take away from this particular webinar is that it is a resource that you cannot ignore, right? So how to buy your first property? Most people are in this boat right here. But before I do that, there is another question. You can use super to buy rental properties. What if then the home is empty and no rental income? Yes, this is a common issue for a lot of investors. If there are no tenants in there, it's costing you to hold on to a home. Guess what? You should be buying a home that's got high enough demand to ensure that there will always be a tenant ready to go in there, right? How do you do that? You need to ensure that you buy a home in an area that's got a lot of infrastructure, a lot of private spending, and good demographics. What does that mean? Infrastructure being roads, buses, trains, that kind of stuff. Private spending, shopping centers, shops, universities, that kind of thing, to ensure that you've got a community, which is the demographics part, right? If you've got a solid community, i.e. a lot of young families, let's say, students, of a young, vibrant community, or maybe an older community, retirement community, whatever it may be, so long as there is a community to ensure that there's a demand for a place to rent, it increases the likelihood that you're not going to get a vacant place for a very, very long time. Now, if it's vacant, what are the levers that you can pull as an investor? The biggest lever that you can pull is to incentivize other tenants to come in, right? How do you incentivize them? You lower the rent. If the rent for that particular suburb is $500 per week, guess what? You can put your property on at $400 per week to just ensure you got a tenant in there. For the first 6 months, you put it at $450 per week, and then you up it at $500 per week. Who here has moved houses before? Hands up. Okay, all right, a few of us. Okay, now, hands down. Who thinks moving houses is a massive pain in the ass? Hands up. Right, so with this particular strategy in mind, right, as an investor, you're putting it down to entice them to come in. In 6 months' time, you up it. Yes, it's a little bit kind of contentious, but in the end of the day, you got to protect your back pocket, and you're enticing them to come in. And if the market is at $500, you're giving them a massive discount, right? So it's okay to do that, and they can always move out if they don't necessarily like it. But I have a feeling they're going to stay because you were giving them a discount anyway, you see, right? Okay, so that answers that one. Next question. Sometimes it can be bad real estate management in change over the next tenant. Absolutely, and you can't really control that. You just need to ensure that if they're doing a bad job, you get rid of them and find a better one, right? Another one. So you were saying better to privately rent, not utilize a real estate to manage your property. Not necessarily. I personally use a real estate manager to manage my properties because I don't like having to think about it. If they're doing a good job, the investor doesn't have to think about it. It's just a vehicle to create wealth. That's all it is, right? Far too many people fall in love with the idea of buying and owning this particular property. Oh, will I live in it? Is the paint looking good? It doesn't matter. So long as you got a tenant in there, so long as it's got good growth potential and it's providing you with enough income to warrant holding onto it, happy days. You don't necessarily need to look into it. You don't necessarily need to worry about it, right? How can you minimize your rent? Is there cheats? Is there a cheats way? Minimize your rent. Minimizing your rent. Go to webinar number 3. We've talked about that on webinar number 3, and there are ways. You talk to your landlord, you talk to your real estate agent and tell them, this is my plan. As per what I was talking about before, if you're trying to get debt from someone, you need to show them that you've got a plan of attack in place. This is what you're doing to increase your income, right? You need to state your case, right? Asking one question without a case or evidence behind it is a low percentage shot, right? There are generous people out there that one question will get you over the line, but I would say that it's best to build a case, a compelling case, so that people will hear you out and give you a discount at the very least, right? No worries. So how do you buy your first property? Most people will sit on this particular in this particular diagram right here. Most people, the first thing that they do is they aim too high, right? They look to buy a $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 property as their first initial property to get into the market. Too high, right? Now, that's a big barrier of entry. Ultimately, automatically, by buying too high, you're paying stamp duty, which is approximately 2 to 3%. So for this particular property right here, let's just call it property number 1. Property number 1 is automatically costing that person, that buyer, $21,000 without even blinking an eyelid. For what? For the government. Unfortunately, this is a rule, right? So suddenly they need to save $21,000. Most people will tell someone to save 20% as a deposit, right? So 20% of a $700,000 property is now $140K, right? You add stamp duty to that, it's $161,000 that they need to save. I don't know about you, but I haven't really met too many people that can save $161,000 in a short period of time. It's very, very difficult. Years to achieve, who knows when that's going to happen. This is why far too many people think it is impossible to acquire their property, right? The next slide will show you how to speed it up dramatically, yeah? Another thing that people consider is if they're looking at lowering their deposit, right, from 20 down to, let's say, 10%, or 15%, or 5% even, something that's holding them back is the lender's mortgage insurance, which is approximately 2 to 3% once more, right? So if it's less than 20% deposit, you're up for $10,000, $15,000, $21,000 hit once more, right, to get in. People use this as an excuse not to get in as well, right? Is this all making sense? Hands up if this is making sense, guys. Cool. Awesome. So the barriers of entry is the deposit, the stamp duty, and lender's mortgage insurance, right? So what you need to consider is the different kind of strategies to speed up this particular process, right? So how do you buy your first property? With strategy, what you need to consider is these 2 government grants right here. If you buy under $475,000, you can forgo lender's mortgage insurance and stamp duty, right? Suddenly, you're saving yourself $21,000 and a potential $15,000 or so on lender's mortgage insurance, right? By buying under $475,000 with the first home loan deposit scheme. Let me say that again. First home loan deposit scheme, FHLDS, which can be found in this particular website. Take a photo of it if you can, right? And then the first home super saver scheme will allow you to save your deposit a hell of a lot faster, right? You can actually save $15,000 per financial year with a maximum of $30,000 saved for your initial deposit, right? Instead of paying a marginal tax rate, which is what you're typically paying, as soon as you get out of the work of your studies and start working, what you can do is, or you'll have to do, is pay tax, right? Most people will be paying 32 to 37% taxes on a certain amount of their income, right? So instead of paying 32 to 37, you can pay 15. You can save yourself 15% tax minimum by utilizing the First Home Super Saver Scheme, right? These are options that the government has available to the public to ensure that they can get into the property market faster, right? So if you're buying under $475,000 in Queensland, right, you can actually get in for as little as $23,000 or $25,000 with conveyancing costs and the like, right? $25,000 or so to get in and buy your first property, relative to buying in with having to save $161,000. I have a feeling $25,000 is a little bit more doable. What do you say about that? Hands up if this is more doable than the previous one. I think that answer is quite obvious in this one. Awesome. Good stuff. Look, it makes sense, right? So if you can utilize the resources available to you to speed up the process and get returns on investments like these, right? Suddenly you're in the space where you're starting to speed up the process of building wealth. That's the gig. Because if you're buying the right property with good growth prospects, right, you're putting yourself in a position to win financially, right? And why the hell not, right? If you can, why not? Why not do it, right? So speed up your property portfolio. Consider the leapfrog strategy, right? This is a key strategy that I personally do myself. I get all my clients to do. How do you speed that up? You need to have a full-time job or a regular income if you're running a business, right? You can potentially use your parents as a guarantor to speed it up, and you don't even need a deposit, right? This is 0% right here. You can literally get in for $2,000, controlling a $475,000 property. This is one of the key strategies to speed up that process dramatically, right? A low deposit, we talked about that. First Home Super Saver Scheme, we talked about that. Pre-approval, post-research, don't buy new, do your research, play the macro and micro game well, right? You need to play the game well. You need to understand what levers to pull. What are the risks associated with buying properties so that you're not going in there eyes closed. You need to understand the game, right? Part and parcel of this is to get educated, because there's a ton of reasons why you shouldn't do it. Until such a time where you can answer and have a solid, confident answer against every single objection that you have, reasons that you shouldn't get into property, you shouldn't get in, right? Make sure that you've got all that information in front of you and available to ensure that you actually win financially, right? So the all-weather strategy, this ties into this, right? The leverage component is allowing you to create a leapfrog strategy, right? Acquire multiple properties along the way with as little deposit down, because what happens is over time, the equity of your property grows, right? Depending on how aggressive you may be, right? And then if you couple that with a diversified portfolio of different kind of asset classes, right? Shares, infrastructure funds, fixed income assets, that kind of stuff. Suddenly you've got a whole portfolio with multiple pillars of income, utilizing your borrowing capacity as a resource, right? Understanding that you've got multiple projects in front of you and allocating your resources accordingly, creating a cash flow management system to ensure that you've got a system in place to automate the process, and it forces you to do well, right? Very important to tick off all of these boxes. Wash, rinse, repeat. This should be the most boring thing ever, right? Because as soon as you have a system, you lock that system in and you let time do the work for you. That is the game, yeah? What we ultimately want to achieve is financial resilience, right? How do you get there? You need to get educated to build your confidence to ultimately get to financial resilience, right? There's nothing quite like the feeling of being able to put your hands up and say, I don't really care so much because I'm good. Financially, I'm good. I don't need to stress, right? You can do whatever the hell you want as soon as you get to financial resilience, right? Pursue your passions, make the difference that you want to make in the world, you know, whatever it may be, you follow what you want to do, right? Income at little to no risk. How do you get there? Well, you need to arm yourself with a bunch of information, build up your confidence, get to financial resilience, and get there. How do you do that? You need to get educated. You need to take action. You need to get experience. You need to get people to help you, build a team around you, build your finances up so that it becomes anti-fragile, right? Nothing will affect it. That's the key, but that's what you ultimately want to get to, right? So what you want to do is look at webinar number 2, work out FIRE, right? How much savings can you put away to invest to speed up the process of the ideal income? A good starting point is 10% to invest every single year. The higher this will be, the faster it's going to take you to achieve your goals. It's really that simple. So if you can save 50% of your current income and put it towards your investments, right? Or projects that'll increase your likelihood of increasing your income and increasing your return on investment for you, suddenly you're pumping on all cylinders and you're actually going to achieve your goals a hell of a lot faster. Be patient, be consistent, and optimize sparingly. Set a solid foundation for yourself to ensure that you're going to win, right? You do not want to be building a massive house on a foundation that's on quicksand, right? Get your cash flows right. Do not spend more than what you're earning. Always, always, always be on a surplus and invest that surplus, or use that surplus to allocate that capital accordingly to increase your income, A, and B, build your portfolio, right? Very important, guys, if you consider it that way, yeah? So bring it all together. Borrowing capacity is a $1 million resource. Use it to your advantage. It is something that you cannot waste, right? It can literally set you apart by hundreds, if not millions of dollars within a 10, 15-year time frame, just by knowing how to use it properly, right? Look into it a little bit more. Yes, there's going to be a whole bunch of questions, and people like me are here to answer those things, right? Make sure you get educated and pass the sleep test, because you don't want to be doing something that's forcing you to lose sleep, right? How do you get debt? We know that serviceability and collateral, income and deposit, you need that. You need a plan of attack, right? Whoever you're trying to get debt out of, right, money from, to pay them back, they need to trust you. How do they trust you? They need to understand that you're proactive in your approach and they can rely upon you, right? How to buy your first property. We covered off on the status quo versus the strategic way, which is utilizing the schemes and the grants associated with that particular strategy and ensuring that you speed up the process of acquiring that property and controlling all the upside. And then we talked about how it works within your building your wealth and building your portfolio. Cool. Future webinars. A survey will be sent out to you guys for future topics. So make sure you answer those surveys. And if you want to see more of me, please feel free to just reach out and just kind of ask me questions on Instagram or LinkedIn, and also answer this particular email. The Student Guild and the SRC really values your feedback, so make sure you provide us with some feedback to share your thoughts. Yeah. Thank you very much, Griffith University, the SRC, and the Student Guild for having me. It's been an awesome 5 weeks hanging out with you guys. Look, I'd love to do this again next year or sometime in the future. Happy to be of service with you guys. Hopefully you've all gotten a bunch of value out of this. We've got a few questions to answer, so let's go through them now. So how can you minute? We've done that. So great. Thanks, Andrew. Thank you very much. Thank you for your feedback. Much appreciated. Cool. What about the expenses to keep the property? Repairs, improvements, satisfying rent demands, tenants' demands. Look, in the end of the day, that is a risk for property investing, and it is part of your income statement, i.e. the income that's coming in from your rent and the costs associated with holding onto it, right? So if your income is more than the cost, happy days. If the income is less than the cost with your investment property, you need to ask yourself, what is that number? Is the number too high or is it too low? Or is it low? Because this number is actually tax deductible for you as well, right? So the government is incentivizing investors to have investment properties to help people on the way up with providing them with residence, right? Residency, so that they can actually live somewhere affordable, right? So the government is providing a tax deduction to all of the property investors. So whatever this deficit is, right, will be tax deductible. For most people, it's around that 32 to 37% off this particular price, right? Now, this is called negative gearing, right? Negative gearing is not going to stay forever. But if you get in sooner rather than later, what the government will typically do is grandfather it. Grandfather meaning everything that's happened in the past stays, and everything in the future, no more negative gearing. So what will typically happen is the Labor Party will most likely aim to get rid of negative gearing once more sometime in the future. Who knows when that'll be? They've obviously given it a good red hot crack. That failed. So they're most likely going to have another go in the future. When that will be, who knows, right? So you just got to understand that it is important to utilize the resources available to you, right? Such a common thing that I keep harping on about. Utilize the resources. And if you don't know what the resources are, get some help or read some books or join more of these kind of webinars, okay? Cool. Do you recommend buying a house, unit, or apartment? I like the idea of land content, right? The more land, the better, right? Not necessarily rural land, like land that is high in demand, i.e. close to 10 to 15 kilometers away from a CBD, right? You want it to be close to a central business district, right? So by doing so, there will always be demand for that land, right? There will always be demand for a house in that particular radius. You do not want to be buying in Goondiwindi. You do not want to be buying in Blackhall. You do not want to be buying in Mount Isa because the demand is not quite as high as you would get in Brisbane or the Gold Coast or the Sunshine Coast, right? So with that in mind, you need land content. Now, you've got house versus townhouse versus apartment, right? So you've got to ask yourself, well, which one do you want? I personally would prefer a house over a townhouse over apartment. Why? Because of the land content. That's my answer to that. Everyone's different though. Everyone's got a different MO to this thing. How I structure my portfolio, I aim to have as much land content within a framework or within a town or within a city that's got massive demand, because what happens is the land increases in value. We can never build more land. Unfortunately, here in Australia, all of the infrastructure is around the eastern seaboard, right? So you want to buy your land, as big a land as possible, as close to the infrastructure as possible, but not so close that it's right next door, right? So that's the key to that thing. Last question right here. What about buying properties under construction? They usually have a lower price compared to when they are new and finished. Yes, it is possible, but my problem with buying new or buying properties under construction is this. You're basically paying the margins or the profits of the developer, the builder, and the marketer or real estate agent. Right, so if you're buying new or you're buying something that's currently under construction, it's typically sold at a premium, right? The challenge that you have there is that the time it takes for the market to catch up is typically 7 to 10 years. So as an investor, losing 7 to 10 years is akin to losing about $500 to $1 million, right? So by making this mistake, you're utilizing your $1 million borrowing capacity, putting it into an asset, the underlying asset that has little to no potential to grow over a 7 to 10 year period. I don't know about you, I'd rather make my borrowing capacity, my resource, my $1 million resource, right, work for me as best as possible, right? So you got to compare apples with apples, and it's a broad question, so we can't really go into specifics, but to get into specifics, you need to compare it to the other houses, other apartments, other townhouses in that particular suburb, because every suburb is its own market. Very, very important to consider. Yeah. Any other questions before I wrap up, guys? We're a little bit over time. Apologies about that. I figured I'd answer a range of questions. In terms of giveaways, I am running a webinar next Wednesday evening. So if you want to join that webinar, go to Andrew David Courtney on Instagram. There's a link in the bio there. register for that webinar. I'm running it from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. It talks about building, winning, property portfolios, right? So feel free to go there, follow me if you like. I'm going to go through about an hour's worth of content once more, go through a bunch of the stuff that we've talked about, plus more high-level investment stuff, which will sort of open the eyes of people who are keen to invest and build their property portfolio. Feel free to follow, connect with me. Happy to help, guys. Ultimately, I'm here to provide as much value as possible to you guys, build a community of multimillionaire philanthropists. That is the main aim of Plenitude Wealth, to ensure that we're increasing financial literacy across the board, across the whole world, ideally, to show people that there are resources available to them. Don't be shy to use it. It's there to help you, right? We ultimately can all get to financial freedom if we're strategic about it. We put some systems in place to actually kick some butt, right? Far too many people are living the status quo life, and unfortunately, status quo is not quite enough to achieve financial freedom, right? I don't know about you, but I certainly don't want to be living off of $60,000 per year when I retire, right? This is what the government's telling couples to do currently, right? So we don't want to be kind of aiming for mediocre. We want to be aiming for a little bit more than that. Well, as far as I'm concerned, a hell of a lot more than that, because there's plenty of time to actually get the stuff done. You just need to ensure that you're consistent, you're patient, and you're strategic in your approaches, right? On that note, thank you very much for your time. Before I let you go, please put one last hand up and make sure you answer those feedback forms, guys. And looking forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Thank you very much for your time. Ciao.